Welcome to the At the Coalface podcast with your host, Jason Greenwood. This podcast is all about what it's really like in the trenches of digital and e-commerce. Welcome, everyone, to the latest episode of the At the Coalface podcast with me, Jason Greenwood, your host. And I am super excited today to be able to bring to you Amit Shah from VTEX. He is the Chief Strategy Officer and US GM, General Manager of VTEX in the United States. Welcome to the podcast, Amit.
Hi, Jason. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Fantastic. Well, look, for those that don't know, and obviously anybody who works in e-commerce probably has heard of VTEX. However, what I'll do is I'll just sort of cover off some of the basics of VTEX, and then you can correct anything I've said wrong. We've got very exciting recent announcement by VTEX, which is that it's gone public on the New York Stock Exchange in the United States. It's a VTEX super popular SaaS e-commerce platform / order management platform / inventory management platform, marketplace platform, B2B, B2C e-commerce, enterprise level platform. Founded in Brazil in 2000, so 21-year-old platform. You guys acquired Work Area Cloud Commerce in February of 2021 to accelerate your penetration into the United States and North America specifically. You count some of your biggest customers such as Walmart, Levi's, Sony, L'Oreal, Motorola. You've raised a fairly significant amount of money even before going public, obviously signifying your success in the market. Raised $140 million in November of 2019, raised $225 million at a $1.7 billion valuation in October of 2020, and then capped off this success, obviously with a successful listing on the New York Stock Exchange in late July. Shares opened at $25.10, well above the initial target price of between $15 and $17 with a market valuation of about $4.6 billion at launch on the stock exchange. So what an absolutely stratospheric run for VTEX.
I guess I should say thank you, right? No, it's been a great couple of years. I don't know that any of us would have predicted all of it to happen as quickly as it did. I do have to admit that, I think maybe 2.5 years ago, I had not heard of VTEX, even after spending a bunch of years in e-commerce at, companies like Magento, all the way back when it was, just an open source project to Hybris, which is now part of SAP. VTEX was, really well known in Latin America and really unknown outside of Latin America. But, I think in Brazil and LATAM, we had most of the Fortune 500 of the Global 1000. And over the past few years, the company has grown that customer base now in the US and in Europe. And more recently, we've now started to expand into Asia Pacific. So I think, it's been a fun 2 years at the company so far. And, we kind of believe it's just the beginning of the journey for us.
Wow, exciting times. And as you say, such a rapid growth. And I mean, for you specifically, you have been in leadership positions for other pretty big businesses, for Avora, Stonebranch, member of the board for Magnolia CMS, Doodle AG out of Switzerland. So you have, I guess, in terms of street cred, you certainly have that senior enterprise, e-commerce, digital CMS background. How did you first, I guess, find out about VTEX? How did you, decide to come on board with VTEX? And what has been your experience? I mean, obviously, very different business in terms of, once you go public, there's a whole new level of, I guess, scrutiny. You're about a month now post IPO. How has the business changed? How did you first find out, I guess, about VTEX? How did you make the decision to jump on board with VTEX? And how has the business changed over the last, say, month since you've gone public with this sort of renewed global interest? I mean, anytime you list on the New York Stock Exchange, it's got to put the spotlight on you.
Yeah, so I think there are a bunch of questions there. Maybe we'll start with the first one, which was, how did I learn about VTEX? And I kind of joke that I left SAP in the middle of 2018. I was semi-retired. I joined the boards of a bunch of different software companies, some of which you named. And at that point, VTEX was just starting to raise money. not in the public markets, but back then in the private markets. And a friend of mine that worked at a big global private equity fund, their Brazil team was looking at VTEX, and they wanted someone from the US market who had experience with e-commerce platforms. That was how I was originally introduced to Mariano and Geraldo, the two co-founders, who are also the two co-CEOs of the company. We got along, right? Because I'd kind of been there in the early days of some other e-commerce platforms. Eventually, we met in person, I think in the spring of 2018 then. And, at the time, it was just kind of, hey, let's have dinner in San Francisco. I left it there. I mentioned off the cuff, randomly, as you do when you get to know people, you talk about your kids and your family. I said, oh, my daughter really loves this guy named Obama, right? And my daughter was 5 or 6 at the time. It was one of the first biographies she read. And Mariano said, oh, Obama's coming to our customer event in Brazil in a couple months. You should come down. I promise that she'll get to meet him, right? And, you've been in technology for a while. You probably met a bunch of founders. And I think one of the common characteristics of founders is they sometimes make outlandish promises like, hey, I'll make sure your kid gets to meet the former president, right? And I said, okay, great. Yeah, that sounds wonderful. I went back home. I eventually told my wife, and she said, oh, we have to go. And I said, are you crazy? Why are we going to go all the way to Brazil just to, see if this happens? But lo and behold, we did, in fact, over our summer holidays, go to Brazil. Mariano completely delivered. My daughter got to meet Obama in person. Of course, it was, amazing for her. And he is the most gracious guy. He's exactly how you thought he'd be. And a couple months later, they got back in touch and said, hey, would you help us out with some research on how to enter the US market? And I said, yes, absolutely. I owe you one, right? You fulfilled my daughter's dream. I'll work for free, right? And that's kind of how we got back together over the summer of 2018. We kind of discussed what it would take to be successful in the US, right? Which is a very different market than other parts of the world. And after a couple of days, I left, went back home to Colorado, and then they got back in touch again in the fall and said, hey, can you help us out 1 or 2 days a month to build a go-to-market plan for the US? I said, sure. I'm kind of free. I'm a free agent. I sit on a bunch of boards, and yeah, this would be fun. And we did that. And sorry for the long story, but eventually we kind of had that plan. And then in January of 2019, they said, hey, this is a great plan, or 2020, we believe in it. Do you believe in it? And at that point, I'd kind of been reminded how much fun it was to, be back in the trenches again. I said, all right, let's go do this. And that was how I, got to VTEX, basically right before COVID hit in February of 2020. So, and, then it's been a full-on sprint.
That is very exciting. And were you instrumental? I'm guessing you're instrumental, and this may be private information, but I'm guessing you were instrumental in the business's acquisition of Work Area as part of their strategic planning for the U.S. market. You were spearheading, obviously, their entry into the U.S. market and spearheading their growth there as the local GM. So I'm guessing that you were the architect of that acquisition and further penetration into the United States.
I'd love to take credit for it. I think this was one of those stories of serendipity, right? So I think back in 2016 or 2017, Mariano and Geraldo, they met the Work Area founders when they were doing a tour of the US, and eventually the Hill family, it's Jason, Darren, and Kylie, who are the 3 founders of Work Area. They even went down to Brazil for a VTEX day. And, we're wowed by the fact that there were 15,000 people in Sao Paulo for an e-commerce event hosted by one company, right? So the two, parties had known each other. Separately, when I was running my own e-commerce analytics company, I had known the Work Area team as well. They actually had licensed our software product. And a couple of years later, right, as we're building out in the US, the opportunity came about for us to, partner and ultimately acquire Work Area. And at that point, it was fortunate because all of us knew each other. We really liked each other and respected the team at Work Area. And, that helped us get the deal done.
the way that VTEX came onto my radar initially, and I produce a premium newsletter that covers all e-commerce news, and I have a podcast, obviously, and I put out content almost every single day on LinkedIn. So I'm very heavily involved. I speak at a lot of conferences, but funnily enough, up until probably a year and a half ago, maybe even a year ago, I hadn't even heard of VTEX, which is kind of shameful almost to a degree, but I was introduced to you guys by Juliana Jackson from OmniConvert, who works very, very closely with your European VTEX team. Hey, you guys have run a few events together in Europe. You sponsor their podcast, E-commerce Growth Stories, and a whole lot of activity, joint activity between you guys and OmniConvert, which is super exciting. And I'll be forever thankful, I guess, to Juliana for introducing you guys to me. But since I've been following you, it's been really interesting to try to, I guess, understand where you guys fit into the pantheon of SaaS e-commerce platforms. And obviously you're much more than just an e-com platform. You know, if I had to put you on the scale based on what I know of your business and based on what I know of your technology, if I had to put you on a scale, say at the maybe slightly lower end of the SaaS e-com scale, where we have the Shopifys and the big commerces of the world that are probably more accessible to the mid-market than something like a VTEX seems to be, which is targeting more the enterprise end of the market, I'd say you feel like you fall much more at the sort of Salesforce Commerce Cloud end of the SaaS e-com platform space than the Shopify BigCommerce end of the space. Would that be an accurate understanding? And obviously, you know, when we compare you guys to platforms like a Salesforce Commerce Cloud or a BigCommerce or Shopify, or even maybe a Peppery or a New Order, or some of the SaaS B2B specific e-commerce platforms, I guess you guys bring together a stack that is broader than A, just e-commerce, and B, bigger than order management and sort of that warehouse management and fulfillment piece. But you also fit the gap on the enterprise end of both B2C, D2C, B2B, marketplace, and then obviously bringing it back into a centralized system. Now, I know you guys don't pitch yourself as an ERP, but you're almost like a baby ERP in that, sure, you're probably almost always integrated with ERPs and maybe PIM systems and CDPs and the like. But you, from an order management perspective, you guys really do it all from an omni-channel space.
Yeah, so maybe I'll start by just agreeing with everything you said. When we try to explain who VTEX is, or give the shorthand, I kind of say we're Tesla in a world full of a bunch of companies still producing gas-powered cars, right? So I think that fundamentally is one of the big differences when you talk about us versus what I call some of the old legacy folks, right? The SAP Hybrises, the IBMs, the Oracles, all of these folks who never really figured out what true cloud SaaS multi-tenant looks like, right? So I think that's, a core differentiator, right? If you used to build gasoline-powered cars, building electric ones is super hard as the world is learning, right? I think the second big thing, and this is not exactly the question you asked, but I'd say, the second big fundamental difference is the only thing we do in life is commerce, right? We're not here to sell you the service cloud and the sales cloud and the marketing cloud, right? We're here to help you build a real, growing, and sustainable online business. And I think that kind of takes us out of, right, the big suite vendors who want to sell as much complexity as possible and convince enterprises that more software is the answer, right? And you and I know that's not always the case, right? And I think thirdly, how we are different from a lot of these other folks is, even the US, more than half of my team is people who work day in, day out with our customers to grow revenue, right? They're all people who used to run online businesses, own their own P&Ls, and their annual targets and bonuses are determined whether or not our customers grow their revenue, right? So we kind of believe that having a singular focus on commerce, making sure that, we're in the boat with our customers, and ultimately we can only be successful if our customers grow. Those are the reasons why, people end up buying VTEX, in addition to all the other amazing things you talked about with our product.
Super exciting. Yeah, I mean, certainly that is one of the things that stood out to me is as you rightly point out, somebody like an Adobe Commerce ex Magento. You know, I come from a very, very long history in the Magento world. And then, you know, a few years ago, pivoted my entire career to focus exclusively on SaaS platforms across the entire commerce stack, including ERP, CRM, a big proponent of NetSuite, et cetera. And so I really have refocused my entire career on SaaS platforms because I do believe, and I'm specifically multi-tenant SaaS platforms, because I do believe it is the future of software delivery. And I believe that these legacy on-premise platforms, not only are they struggling today, but they're going to continue to struggle even worse into the future, you know, the ATGs of the world and many of the other platforms that you've referred to. And I think not only is it, I think it's a double-edged sword for these guys, right? These legacy platforms, not only in many instances are they on-prem, which is a legacy delivery model, and many businesses just don't want that cost, particularly the upfront cost, and then the OpEx cost of maintaining and enhancing and upgrading and patching these on-premise platforms. So we've got not only a legacy software delivery model and a legacy development model, but we also have this legacy model of a kind of this all-in-one suite where basically if you want to get the most out of those platforms, you kind of almost have to buy into that entire suite. And that's even happening with the Magento platform now that it's been brought into the Adobe Borg. Kind of to get the most out of the suite, you kind of have to buy into the entire Adobe model. And it's not really, they don't really pitch it as a standalone e-commerce platform product anymore. It really do pitch it as a suite. And as you rightly point out, not only does that entail potentially massive organizational change to onboard and displace whatever you have in place today, but it typically entails massive cost and incredible timelines for implementation as well. So I think you hit the nail on the head. I think this sort of laser focus on commerce by VTech seems like, you know, you guys really have stayed in your lane in ways that many of these other much larger enterprise software companies just, they don't seem to be able to do it.
It's amazing when we think back. I think, you know, 20 years ago when Salesforce launched, Mark Benioff, I think the first logo they had was, you know, this circle that had software in it and then a big X around it, right? And their whole pitch was, you know, we're not, you know, we don't deliver software. And guess what? 20 years later, all they do is buy software companies and sell you more software, right? And what we keep learning over and over again is that our customers want guidance. They want advice. They want expertise. And ultimately, you know, our customers don't wake up in the morning and turn to their husbands or their wives or their partners and say, God, honey, I can't wait to buy more software today, right? I don't believe there's anyone who's ever said that, right? I can't wait for the next demo. I can't wait to open up this 1,000-row Excel spreadsheet and look at this RFI for the next 6 months, right? Like, unfortunately, that's kind of the world we've created with software, but, you know, we're trying to change that. We're trying to get back to the point of why our customers are in business, which is to grow their own businesses, not grow ours, right? And the more we can do to kind of align our interests with the customers and demonstrate to them that, you know, we're really there to measure and prove that growing their revenues is the business we're in, then, you know, that kind of creates a better relationship between us and the customer.
Now, if we get into the nitty-gritty of what VTEX actually brings to the table as an enterprise platform, you really, you know, make sure that I understand this correctly. So effectively, if a business today, for example, was a vertically integrated omni-channel business that does B2B, does B2C, maybe they have marketplace aspirations of building a marketplace hanging off of their retail brand, because let's say they've got a tremendous amount of traffic coming to their site currently. Then they have order management, they have warehouse management. They've got a lot of components in the stack, right? They need hybrid models. They need distributed order management so that they can do things like click and collect, ship from store, manage local POS in store in relation to all of that as part of the stack. Now, typically, these are oftentimes separate but integrated components. So they might have one platform for B2C e-commerce. They might have another platform, say a New Order or something like that for B2B e-commerce, or Peppery for B2B e-commerce. They might have a Miracle or a marketplace or platform in their business to run their marketplace operations. And then they'll have a distributed order management system to run all of their order management. And then they'll have typically a separate, especially if they have own DCs and warehouses, they'll have a separate WMS, you know, such as a PeopleVox or something like that, to run warehouse operations and warehousing and dispatch and logistics operations. So of all of those components, what does VTEX take out? Do they take out, it sounds like they can cover pretty much the B2C and B2B e-commerce, got that dialed, can understand the complexities of B2B, for example, and multiple price lists. And, the quoting process for B2B is often very complex. The promotional and trade pricing process of B2B is typically very complex. And then obviously marketplace operations can be hugely complex, both in terms of the supply side and the demand side, and allowing and easily onboarding suppliers into that ecosystem. And then distributed order management, again, massively complex for many businesses. It feels like you tick almost all of those boxes, except for maybe the warehouse management piece. Would that be about correct?
Yeah, I think that's a really good summary, right? And, the reason why we do so much is, almost a reflection of where VTEX started 20 years ago, right? So, our first customer was in Brazil, and it was a big one, Walmart, right? And when you start with someone like Walmart, they have enterprise class demands, right? They had 500 stores across Brazil. They understood, even before Walmart in the US understood, the power of having a fully integrated e-commerce platform that also not only, hosted the online product catalog and the shopping cart, but also behind the scenes, right, did the order management and ultimately what we call distributed order management, right? Because, if you think of the delivery infrastructure of Brazil 20 years ago, and quite honestly, most countries 20 years ago, including the US, it wasn't so easy always to get a package to a customer. So they needed to leverage those physical storefronts around the country. And so the only way that we could deliver, a great e-commerce experience to their customers was to build the e-commerce platform and the order management and the distributed order management, right? And that was kind of the good fortune of having a demanding enterprise customer in that part of the world. And over time, as we got more customers, right, they weren't necessarily so excited about adding more vendors and adding, 6 or 12 months to go live every time they needed a new business model, right? So eventually, the platform evolved from business to consumer to add business to business capabilities to then ultimately add marketplace capabilities, because again, right, our customers wanted to be able to sell on other marketplaces, but they also wanted to have their own marketplaces, much like Amazon did. And so, the product continued to grow over time. And I think, maybe we got lucky because we built our product in a modular way, right? So today you can use us just for the commerce platform, or only for marketplace, or only for the order management, or for all three, right? And because we built this in a kind of composable way, customers have a lot of flexibility and they have a lot of control over what parts of their online operations they want to start with, right? And over time, we give them the flexibility of many different business models all under one roof. But yes,
well, it sounds like it sounds like you scale basically alongside your customers, which is definitely a solid growth plan, as evidenced by the demand for your platform and the demand for investing in your platform. Makes absolute sense. And where do you see now? We're hearing a lot of buzz in the marketplace around headless commerce, composable commerce, component commerce, whatever you want to call it. And from what I'm seeing from my 20 plus years in the industry, some circa 99% of merchants that I deal with, just headless makes zero sense today. Now, we obviously have the announcement by Shopify at Unite 2021 that with hydrogen and oxygen, they haven't called it headless, but they've effectively gone headless, or are going headless, to where even their native theme engine will be a headless architecture, where they've got this bifurcation between the back end and the front end, but the front end headless component will still be hosted by them on their Oxygen platform, on their Oxygen hosting infrastructure. But even Shopify has finally had to, I guess, cave to the demand and the buzz around headless, and trying to meet the market where to try to follow the puck where it's going, right? I still believe that 99% of merchants out there will do very, very well in a monolithic e-commerce implementation environment. They don't need to spend the time, the cost, the headache, the complexity both upfront and ongoing, of effectively negating the benefits of a complete end-to-end SaaS platform by going headless and effectively having a bespoke front end that has to be hosted independent of even if it's a SaaS backend, even if you've got a SaaS headless CMS on the back end, a SaaS headless commerce engine on the back end, your front end effectively, for all intents and purposes, is no longer SaaS. And therefore you still have all the considerations around PCI compliance and all those other things that go along with building effectively your front end from scratch. And are you seeing, for you guys, in terms of implementations, total implementations of VTEX, now being a native SaaS platform and always have been a native SaaS platform, you guys must have built out a robust API layer by definition. And what are you seeing in the marketplace around headless deployments of VTEX? Is it still largely monolithic in your deployment model, or is it becoming much more common to deploy VTEX in a headless environment?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, number one, we are, almost all of our services were built API first, right? So whether you want to turn on catalog, checkout, right, any of our pricing, promotions engines, all of those things are API first. So I think, we didn't necessarily drink the Kool-Aid on headless, but we did believe in this idea of a composable architecture that would give the end customer, more control and flexibility over how they use VTEX. What I would tell you is that, how customers deploy VTEX is different by region, right? So in North America, for example, where, maybe 80% of the market is already picked a commerce platform, they may start with us on Marketplace, right? Or they may be adding a new business model. If, they're doing B2C, they may start with B2B, right? In which case they may already have existing customer-facing assets, in which case it is a headless deployment model, right? Because you're not going to rebuild your front end just to use our B2B capabilities or to use our Marketplace capabilities. In other markets where, let's say 50% of the market or more is still net new to commerce, they are maybe using us both for the front end as well as all of the commerce and the OMS. So, I think we were, again, fortunate because of, building flexibility into our architecture that customers can choose, what parts of VTEX they want to start with. And, the metric we really use, we measure this across every deployment, is this idea of time to revenue, right? How long are you on VTEX before there's revenue coming in the door through our application, right? And that's what we focus on much more than whether, you're going to use us in a headless fashion or use more of the tech stack that comes out of the box.
I am Alexandria Collis, Director of Customer Experience for Princess Polly. I'm focused on our strategy and innovation in the CX department here at Princess Polly. I have a quote, and I always tell our CX leaders that customer experience is the heart of an organization, and we pump the blood and deliver the oxygen to the vital organs in the business to help them thrive and grow stronger. The Gorgias platform allows our agents a seamless place to just do it all. We are really there for the customer every step of the way if they want. Our customers expect quality and efficiency where they are. So the real question is, how do you get quality and efficiency across every single platform? And then once you have it, how do you maintain it? And I believe that with the Gorgias platform, we can do that. If you're interested in learning more about Gorgias, go to gorgias.com and mention podcast for 2 months free.
Makes absolute sense. And for you guys, if we do look at that bifurcation that you say is happening between, say, North America and rest of world, let's just group it broadly that way. Would you say that it's a sort of a 50-50 deployment model in the United States at the moment between headless and monolithic on VTEX? And then secondarily, what is the content and commerce capability of VTEX? What does VTEX bring to the table around that merger of content and commerce? Because one of the major, I guess, arguments for going headless is the ability to bring in, I guess, a best of breed CMS platform, like a Prismic or a Contentful or something like that for all of your CMS needs, your content-based needs. And let's face it, that content and commerce discussion is becoming much more of a discussion, particularly as, with the death of third-party cookies and the privacy moves with iOS, etc. Brands are actually starting to get religion around customer experience, customer retention, customer lifetime value, retention-based marketing, as opposed to this laser focus, this almost myopic focus on acquisition historically because of cheap acquisition through the Facebooks and the Googles of the world. Acquisition is going up. It's becoming, much more complex. And as a result of that, brands really are truly getting religion around brand and retention. And so there's been this, I guess, what I've seen in the market is much more of a refocusing between, instead of having this pure push, sell, market. Now we're much more seeing a balance between brand marketing and sales focused marketing and conversion focused marketing. So what does VTEX bring to the table, I guess, in that content management side of the platform versus, say, bringing it into a headless environment where you would use an external, say, headless CMS?
Yeah, so I think, you'd started with the question of what does our deployments look like today? I would say, you kind of started with the, hey, 99% of customers probably should not go headless. I would agree with that. In the US, where most of our customers are upper mid-market or enterprise, I would say 9 out of 10 today are still using our tech stack, right? They're not deploying in a headless fashion because they don't, what I've seen is the pendulum usually swings from one end of the spectrum to the other, right? So 20 years ago, IT would build everything custom, right? Then all of the power swang to the business user with the budget, and all of a sudden sales and marketing were picking every application and IT was there just to check the box, right? And now with headless and these API first services, right, IT kind of has the ability to say, hey, we need an equal seat at the table. And by the way, if you really want something, unique, we need to build it all ourselves, right? And the truth is, as you and I know, right, we're just recreating the spaghetti code of custom platforms from the past, right? Where now, you don't have to use VTEX and everything we build with our platform, but then you're going to have 6 different API services and vendors to manage, right? To recreate the same thing. So, what we've seen, most of our customers don't want that headache. They don't want the mess. They don't want to manage 6 vendors and try to figure it out themselves. And, oh, by the way, it's not that easy to recruit developers and keep them, right? So I don't think that the world is going to move to a fashion where everything is headless and, you manage 5 or 10 API vendors, right? The second question you asked, and I'm taking notes or trying my best, is, is the CMS, something both unique, compelling, and more required today versus in the past? I might say no, right? I think, again, you were spot on with the theme of content plus commerce, right? But now the content and community, right? If you go back to the old 3 C's that people talked about 10 years ago, right? The content is happening on Instagram or TikTok, right? Or third-party platforms where the community also is, right? And you're seeing all the commerce platforms build integrations to Instagram because Facebook has said, hey, we're out of the business of sending you free traffic, right? You, brand or retail partner of ours, you could integrate to Instagram where all of your community already is, and you can shop on Instagram, and all you need to do is, yes, you can own the shopping cart, but everything else is going to happen on Instagram, right? So I think, our job as VTEX is to make sure that, our brands, our retailers, our enterprises can meet the customer wherever they want to do business, whether that's on a third-party community site, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, a third-party marketplace, whether that's Amazon, eBay, Etsy, or, the enterprise's own mobile app, etc., right? And by building using APIs, right, we hopefully make it easy for our customers to integrate and meet that customer wherever they are. That's our goal.
Makes absolute sense. And from your perspective, what do you think about this really fast accelerating trend that we're seeing primarily out of the United States today of Amazon native brands, or at least marketplace native brands, where new brands are coming to market? They don't even establish their own e-commerce website because they have a marketplace driven strategy. And so therefore they live and die by those marketplaces that are already driving the traffic for them. They even run marketing on those, those marketplaces, to the point now where Amazon is now number 3 behind Facebook and Google in terms of ad platforms in the United States. And so we're seeing, holding companies be established now to buy up Amazon native brands, and they'll buy up 10, 20, 30 Amazon native brands or marketplace native brands, put them under one roof, but they still need a centralized back-end management system, an omni-channel management system. And outside of, say, an ERP, they still typically need something that goes beyond your typical ERP to manage omni-channel operations in that environment. And are you seeing many sort of those holding companies or those marketplace native brands, particularly the enterprise ones that are very big, are you seeing many of those take up VTEX as effectively a back office platform to manage omni-channel operations, even if they are, even if they don't have an e-commerce website of their own at all?
Yeah. So, you kind of hit home with that question. My wife started her own online clothing brand about 7 years ago. And I can tell you that this year, probably at least once a month, she gets contacted by one of these, firms that's rolling up Amazon brands, right? What I tell you, and what my wife has done from day one is, if you imagine a stool with one leg, it doesn't stay upright so easily, right? And my wife's business, she's always had direct to consumer on her own website. She started a B2B business, and then her third leg of the stool was selling on Amazon. It does happen to be the fastest growing part of her business, and I imagine from millions of other brands. But what she's seen over the last 6 months, as you alluded to, is the cost of advertising on Amazon is almost double, right? So I think they're now, I think they have something like a $20 billion advertising revenue base that they've grown. And, my wife, like many others, is now looking at Walmart as the second marketplace. So I think what you will see is the smarter brands, the smarter retailers will decide that, having 100% of your traffic and customers come from a marketplace where you don't own the end customer relationship is a pretty dangerous place to be, right? So, we don't necessarily target brands that only sell on one marketplace or only through one channel, because that's really not our value proposition, right? Our whole value prop is, how do you extend your brand and meet customers everywhere through multiple channels, and manage inventory and leverage a physical footprint where it makes sense. So, I think the selling only on Amazon is pretty dangerous, just like building a restaurant that doesn't allow people to come to, sit inside the restaurant and only sell through Uber Eats is probably pretty dangerous as well.
Absolutely. Being, mono channel, I think is risky, particularly if you're a digital e-commerce pure play, because not all of your customers are necessarily going to be on that singular channel. And, customers are channel fickle as well. That we've seen a mass migration, into social commerce, as you rightly pointed out. And even though social commerce channels have made it very clear that they are moving to an in-app commerce model, whereby, the customer doesn't have to leave the app to complete the transaction. And so therefore, you're really providing the order management on the backside, hanging off of the social marketplace, as it were. Now, for you guys, you guys don't provide a point of sale system as part of VTEX, as far as I'm aware. Correct me if I'm wrong. And you don't provide the warehouse management side, right? You kind of stop at the OMS end of the puzzle. And also, although you integrate with point of sale systems, you aren't there primarily to be that point of sale system in store for omni-channel or physical retailers. Do I understand that right?
That's correct, right? In store, we are not necessarily going to be the credit card processor, right? But we will be the in-store partner for the sales associate, right? So we'll help that sales associate leverage everything the brand or the retailer knows about that customer and their offline purchase behavior to make sure that, they can more intelligently meet the customer when they happen to be in store, right? Whether that's, knowing their past purchase behavior, or understanding, maybe it's a wish list they've created online, right? Or, understanding what's the collection or the wardrobe they've built both online and offline. So our job there is to make sure that, the omni-channel experience is better than the single channel experience.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I think that's a base expectation now as well, that customers do expect, hey, if I tell you who I am in store, then I want you to know what my purchase history is. I want you to know what my size preferences are. I want you to know all these things about me, because at the end of the day, I don't want someone just simply coming up to me in a store and going, hey, can I help you with anything today? Right? It feels like we're in many instances in retail experiences, we've moved backwards as opposed to forwards. So it makes absolute sense that you would provide, I guess, that tooling for salespeople effectively in store, or concierges. Let's think of it that way. Let's treat them as concierges rather than salespeople, because at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is you're trying to create an experience that's memorable, even if they don't make a purchase. And I think that's really where the world is going to, particularly as we get to a place where commerce is everywhere, and a lot of commerce will become automatic, or what I call stealth commerce. So we have smartification of everything, smartification of pantries and fridges and vehicles and everything else. And I don't think we're too far away from, you defining your preferred suppliers for just about everything, from grocery all the way to auto parts, and having those devices, those smart connected devices, making those purchases on your behalf, pre-authorized, and you don't even know when they happen. So they're completely frictionless at the end of the day, and all you have to do is fulfill them. And I'm thinking of, vehicles that automatically contact your auto parts supplier when it's time for an oil change, and then automatically sending the oil and filter to your local garage, and automatically booking you in for that oil change and letting you know, and automatically adding that to your Google Calendar so you know when to take the car in for that oil change. And it all just happens seamlessly behind the scenes, with your tokenized payment methods also stored with all of these suppliers or retailers. And it all just happens without you ever having to actively make a purchase decision. Is that what you guys are starting to see as well? I mean, obviously we've got smart pantries and smart fridges starting to come out, even smart ovens, smart devices, smart TVs. We're pretty rapidly getting to a place, voice devices, etc. So channel explosion is a thing. And I can see a future, within the next 10 to 15 years, where so many of these transactions are either instigated on what we wouldn't traditionally consider an e-commerce platform or an e-commerce site or even a social site, but they're executed from everything that surrounds us in our day-to-day lives. Is that something that you're seeing a trend towards, at least in the future?
Yes, is the short answer. You made a really great observation that, somehow it feels like retail may have moved backwards in the past 2 decades. I would tend to agree, right? So, as many of these big box retailers grew, especially in markets like America, where, basically there's a store, every 10 minutes you drive, you're going to hit another store or a shopping mall or a strip mall, right? Like, America makes it really easy for people to spend money, right? All these retailers went public. Eventually, Wall Street, wanted to see profits, and they decided the way to deliver profits was to, keep squeezing the retail staff, right? And keep lowering wages to the point where, you didn't have a skilled sales force in the store, because anyone that, could make more money eventually moved to a different job. And if you went into a store, they weren't super knowledgeable at the product, right? Which all of a sudden made the online buying experience better, because there you had ratings, you had reviews, you had product videos, and all of a sudden, if you're making a non-commodity purchase, you are probably better off starting the research online and maybe even buying online, because, right, the online channel answered the questions better than the offline channel, right? So hopefully retail's catching up through technology. And when you talk about that world of connected commerce, we do have some fun customers who are doing this, right? So one of our global customers is Whirlpool, right? And, they, in addition to washing machines and dryers, they also make fridges, right? And we have another global customer called ABI InBev, right? Anheuser-Busch, right? So I think they've got about 50 brands online and, in the physical world. And Whirlpool and AB InBev, they built the smart fridge, right? Where the smart fridge knows when you're running low on your favorite beverages of the adult kind, and it can automatically order them for delivery, right? And I think that is the world that will only grow, right? That Your refrigerator will know what you're purchasing on a weekly basis. It'll know what your staple ingredients are. It'll know when to reorder them, right? And, we have folks like Amazon who, have obviously found their own way into the home, whether it was originally with the dash button that you pushed when you needed laundry detergent to Alexa now, right? Where you can just say it out loud, I need more of this. And all of a sudden it shows up 2 days later, right? So, for us, Amazon is both a great friend and a great foe, right? It's a friend because, we work with them all around the world. We use AWS, which is an amazing cloud platform. And they're a friend because every other retailer and brand has to keep up, right? To make sure that they service the customer as well as Amazon.
Absolutely nailed it. Now, we're also seeing a trend emerging primarily in the United States, and this is obviously a trend that is likely to spread around the world. America often pioneers a lot of these new commerce models and this adaptation, this rapid adaptation of commerce. And what we're seeing out of the United States right now is two distinct phenomenons. One is the rise of the holding company that buys distressed brands, right? Very successful historic brands. And I'm thinking of, Tai Lopez and Retail E-commerce Ventures, and then buying Pier 1 and Radio Shack and Dress Barn and all these, Franklin Mint and some very big legacy physical retail brands, right? Where they may have had thousands of stores at their individual peaks. They didn't adapt fast enough to the e-commerce wave. They didn't close underperforming stores fast enough, or they couldn't get out of leases fast enough. So they had to file for bankruptcy or some form of bankruptcy protection. And then, these companies like Rev come in and buy them distressed at an extreme discount or for next to nothing. And then they resuscitate them as pure play e-com brands and bring them into their ecosystem with one singular holistic backend with very low cost, a very low cost OpEx model, where they effectively become brand holding companies. And then we're also seeing, on the flip side of that, we're seeing major mall owners where they have, they might own 100 malls across America, and they have one retail chain that has one of their stores in every one of those malls. They go under, or they file for bankruptcy protection. We now have mall owners buying retailers out of bankruptcy just to keep their malls tenanted with those retailers. Now, how have these two phenomenon affected VTEX in terms of, how many brands are you, like holding companies, for example, are you becoming the engine, right? So multi-brand retailers coming onto the VTEX platform saying, hey, we want to be your commerce partner for the future. And whether we have one brand today and we're going to have 50 brands 5 years from now, we're going to do it all on VTEX because it provides us a single platform to build out our multi-brand aspirations on top of it at a relatively low cost, because it's all centralized on the one platform, right? And in terms of technical ease, what it means is instead of trying to integrate the different e-commerce platforms of these 50 brands, we can migrate them all onto a single platform with a common API infrastructure. So are you seeing those two trends accelerate in America like we think they are? And is that becoming a big value prop for VTEX, for these multi-brand retailers?
So yes, right. There's certainly the rise of these holding companies, right, where they're, as you said, kind of harvesting the corpses of old retail, right, and either buying brand value, right, and awareness for pennies on the dollar, right, and cutting out the retail costs, right. In the case of at least the business model of some of them. In the case of the shopping mall owners like Assignment Property Group, they may have a slightly different business model, right? Which is, hey, instead of charging you rent, if we quote unquote own you, the retailer, then we're just going to take % of revenue, and it might be 50% of the revenue or 80% of the revenue, right? We have some of those folks as customers. But if you kind of dial back and ask the 50,000 foot question, why did those brands or retailers get into trouble? Ultimately, it's because they stopped being relevant to the end customer. Yes, they may have overexpanded in terms of retail storefronts or leases. They may have made some bad purchasing decisions, but ultimately they stopped being relevant to the end customer, right? They didn't keep up with the trends. They didn't, continue to build a relationship with the end customer. And when we think about, the multi-brand customers we have, it's someone like a Whirlpool that has KitchenAid and 20 other brands, and they are interacting with customers in 30 countries around the world, right? It's someone like Anheuser-Busch that has 50 different, beer and beverage brands, and it's selling around the world, right? It's someone like VF Corp that owns, the Wrangler, Kipling, North Face, et cetera, right? Where those brands are still relevant to the end customer, right? And those are the folks that we love to do business with, because every year they're thinking about new ways to engage deeply with the end customer, right? And that's what keeps those brands alive and successful. I think the other business model of, buying dying retail brands, okay, maybe you'll make some money, but I don't know whether you're going to have the capabilities to be relevant for the long term.
Makes sense. So, effectively what you're saying is, sure, you might have, these individually crappy brands, does it make them automatically stronger by putting a basket of crappy brands underneath an umbrella and trying to resuscitate them, right? I think what you're saying is effectively the jury is out on that. And you'd rather hitch your, you'd rather hitch your wagon to the horse of currently relevant brands that aren't in distress and are rapidly growing and expanding market share, not through acquisition primarily, but through simply either expanding their product range, expanding the verticals and categories they play in, or expanding the markets they play in.
That's exactly right? And I'd never call it a crappy brand, right? But we've now heard this overused phrase that COVID accelerated many trends already in motion, right? But in the U.S. there were retailers like Pier 1, right? I don't know the last time I ever thought to drive and buy something at Pier 1, right? The fact that it's now under new ownership doesn't make it any more relevant, right? The opposite is someone like Payless Shoes, which is one of our customers, where there's new management, a new owner, right? And they've really been thoughtful about how to rebuild their presence in the US market while actually growing a physical presence in Latin America, right? And so I think, financial arbitrage gives you, months of life. It doesn't give you years of life, right? To get, to really survive for the long term and grow a business, you have to, meet that customer need wherever you are.
Couldn't agree more. Well, look, we're coming to the end of our time together, and I do really appreciate your time. You obviously have your finger on the pulse of e-commerce, particularly, at that enterprise end of the scale. Unlike, you've got that unique perspective of playing at that enterprise end of the scale with a platform that is pretty broad reaching, particularly across all the commerce components of a given business. So thank you very much for bringing your wisdom to the table and sharing so openly and honestly with, with our listeners. I really appreciate it. And is there any final parting thoughts based on your experience over the last year and a half, 2 years with VTEX that you could give our listeners? Some of them work in the space, some of them are retailers. We have a pretty broad mix of listeners to the podcast, but is there anything around, I guess, the trends that you're seeing in retail, the trends you're seeing in e-commerce and digital commerce? Is there anything specifically from your case of experience over the last year and a half that you'd say, hey, look out for this because this is an emerging trend I'm seeing and you do not want to miss this boat?
I think that, the two things I'd leave with, right? Number one, right? Going live it's the beginning of the journey. It's not the end of the journey, right? Too often we've seen customers where they're so focused on getting their sites live, right? And, what they ultimately realize is, oh man, that was only the beginning, right? Now, what do we do for the next 5 years, right? So really taking a long-term approach to your business and how it's going to grow online, number one. And number two, at the risk of maybe being, counterintuitive to our business, right? Ultimately, software doesn't build businesses, people do, right? So, think about your internal capabilities and, whether or not your partner is going to have skin in the game for the long term, right? I think those are the two things that I'd encourage everyone to think about to build kind of long-term sustainable businesses that grow.
Could not agree with you more. Very, very well said. That has been my experience as well. Now, if our listeners want to get a hold of you or reach out to you or talk to you or VTEX, what is the best place to find Amit Shah?
So at the risk of getting flooded, I would say just shoot me an email. It's amit@vtex.com, and I'll be in touch.
Fantastic. No, that sounds great. Again, thank you very much for your time and your wisdom. Congratulations on all of the recent success of VTEX. I wish you guys all of the best, and I'll be watching very, very closely as you guys grow.
Thank you, Jason, and thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the At the Coalface podcast. If you want more At the Coalface, you can subscribe to our premium e-commerce and digital newsletter, At the Coalface Digest.